Baik, apakah kita mulai sekarang, Mbak Fani? Oke, baik. Kita akan memulai acara seminar hari ini. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, salam sejahtera, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the International online seminar that titled Prehospital Incident Medical Emergency Response or Primer to Natural Disaster. Selamat bergabung di seminar online internasional yang menghadirkan pembicara-pembicara hebat dari 3 negara, yaitu Thailand, Australia, dan Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, we presented 4 great speakers from 3 countries, Thailand, Australia, and Indonesia. First of all, we send our honorable to Mr. Fani, Mrs. Fani Cynthia Rahmi, S.Kep, as the CAO of Media Medical Organization. We send our honorable to Mr. Agus Setiawan, S.Kp, MNDN, as the Dekan FIK UI. Also, we send honorable to founder of Peduli Jiwa. We send our honorable to the great speakers, Professor Paul Arbon, AM, FACN, FAAN from Australia. Honorable to Pratuma Rithpho, PhD, MSN, FAAN from Thailand. Honorable to Nurse Annie Nuraini Agustini, S.Kep, MSc, PhD from Indonesia. Honorable to Nurse Yudi Chandra, S.Kep from Indonesia. And our warm greetings also to the moderator of this seminar, Nurse Yelmi Reni Putri, S.Kep, MAN. And especially to all the participants of this international seminar. Hope you all are in a good conditions. Praise be to the God, because of His grace, we can join this seminar to gain knowledge from 4 great speakers. Furthermore, please allow me, Rabhita Diorarta, S.Kep Nurse, as the master of the ceremony to present the schedule of today's seminar. First, opening. Second, welcoming speech. Third, an introduction about media medical. 4, presentation and discussion sessions. And the last, we have closing. Ladies and gentlemen, the next schedule is a welcoming speech from Dekan FIK Universitas of Indonesia. We invite Mr. Agus Setiawan, S.Kp, MNDN, to deliver the speech. Time is yours. Pak Dekan, Pak Agus Setiawan boleh untuk memberikan kata sambutannya.
Oke, terima kasih, Mbak Rabhita. Good morning, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. The honorable speakers and also our colleagues from Media Medical and Peduli Jiwa and all distinguished participants. On behalf of the Faculty of Nursing Universitas Indonesia, I would like to extend our gratitude to welcome you online at the international seminar hosted by the Postgraduate Students Association, Faculty of Nursing Universitas Indonesia, in collaboration with Media Medical and peduli jiwa. As we all are aware that it's been 2 years since the world is hit by COVID-19 pandemic. So it has affected in every aspect of our lives. Despite the challenges resulted from the crisis, we believe that this situation has provided opportunities for us to keep developing innovation, particularly in the area of healthcare. It is also a good time for us to learn from each other regarding the best practice to deal with such disaster. We are grateful that today we have experts in the area who will share with us their knowledge and experience in pre-hospital incident emergency response to natural disaster. In particular, I would like to greet Professor Paul Arbon from Australia. If you remember, we met back in 2001 when I visited the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and University of Adelaide when you were there, but now you have moved to Flinders University. And also I'd like to greet Dr. Pratuma Rithpho. Thank you for coming with us, and also our colleagues Dr. Eni Agustini and Pak Yudi Chandra. I also would like to thank the committee who have prepared this seminar, who have worked very hard. And also, last but not least, I'd like to thank the all participants who joining this seminar. I do hope that this seminar will bring fruitful benefits for us, and we can learn from each other regarding the topic that discussed in this seminar. Thank you very much. Good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you. Thank you for the speech, Mr. Agus Setiawan, as a Decan of Faculty of Nursing, University of Indonesia. Next, we have an introduction about Media Medical Organization from CAO Media Medical, and also to open this seminar, we invite Fanny Shantiara S.Kep to deliver the description about Media Medical Organization and also to open this seminar. The time is yours.
Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, good morning everyone. So today we will hold the seminar Primer to Natural Disaster, and Honorable Mr. Agus Setiawan, and for all the speakers, Peduli Jiwa and HMP UI Universitas Indonesia. And in this time, we will introduce the Media Medical as the company who held the seminar and training for the health medics, and for the next, we will hold a seminar for free. This time is to support our medic in Indonesia for nursing and midwifery. So this is the one of our support to our appreciation to nursing and midwife. Of course, and in this time we will and this time our seminar will start. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fanny, to open to the speech and to open the seminar. Ladies and gentlemen, now we are about to start the main agenda of this seminar. For this session, Nurse Yelmi Reni Putri S.Kep MAN will lead the presentation as the moderator. Nurse Nuraini is one of a postgraduate doctoral student at University of Indonesia. She is also the lecturer in Stikas for the Cook Bukit Tinggi. She has many experiences to be researchers and scientific work in many activities. So, without any further ado, please welcome Nurse Nuraini Putri, S.Kep MAN.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rapita, for this occasion. Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi dan salam sehat untuk kita semua. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome on this international seminar, Prehospital Incident, Medical Emergency Response to Natural Disaster. Terima kasih untuk MC telah memberikan waktu untuk saya memoderatori seminar online internasional ini. Thank you for inviting me as a moderator on this occasion. So, baik, saya akan coba mengcombine bahasa karena kita internasional, namun kita juga mempunyai beberapa partisipan yang membutuhkan kita berbahasa Indonesia. Baik, selamat datang bagi semua partisipan. Dan selamat datang bagi yang kami banggakan kepada para pembicara kami yang berasal dari Australia, Thailand, Indonesia, dan yang sedang berada di Jepang, kalau saya tidak salah ini Pak Yudi ya. Well, welcome for all participants on this international seminar, and most special, welcome for our proud speakers from Australia, Thailand, Indonesia, and also the speaker who are still stay in Japan. Seperti yang telah disampaikan MC tadi, bahwa kita akan menerima sharing ilmu dari 4 narasumber yang kita banggakan. As MC mentioned before, we have 4 speakers here. Prof. Paul Arbon, AM, FACN, FAAN. Good morning, Ms. Paul. Can you hear my voice?
Good morning. Great to be
Morning. Okay, thank you. And then selamat pagi, Ibu NS and Nuraini Agustini S.Kep MSc, selamat pagi Ibu Eni.
Selamat pagi.
Terima kasih. And then selamat pagi, good morning to Dr. Pratuma Rithpho, PhD MSN RN, Sawadika.
Good morning, Sawadika.
Thank you. And then selamat pagi NS Yudi Chandra S.Kep, selamat pagi Pak Yudi. Pak Yudi, selamat pagi Pak.
Hayo gozaimasu, selamat pagi.
Oke, baik, masih di Jepang ya Pak?
Iya, sebetulnya saya masih nempuh studi, cuman sekarang lagi ngambil data kebetulan, jadi sekarang lagi di Indonesia. And just announcement aja, Bu Yelmi itu Mbak Eni sudah lulus PhD-nya, jadi sekarang beliau officially sudah jadi doktor.
Oh, I see.
Per
Bu Eni.
Maret kemarin, yes.
Bu Eni ya?
Iya.
Okay, thank you for reminding me. Baik, sebelum kita masuk ke sesi pembicaraan materi, saya ingin mengingatkan beberapa hal. Yang pertama, masing-masing pembicara akan diberikan waktu maksimal 20 menit untuk sharing materi. Kemudian pertanyaan bagi partisipan silahkan diajukan melalui kolom chat. Jika ada pertanyaannya banyak sekali dan akan dipilih secara random untuk dijawab masing-masing pembicara. Silahkan disebutkan tujuan pertanyaannya ke siapa. Kemudian pertanyaan boleh dengan berbahasa Indonesia ataupun berbahasa Inggris dan nanti akan ditranslate kepada masing-masing pembicara yang akan dituju. Then before we enter the giving speech from speakers, I would like to inform you several things. First, if you have a question, please write your question on the live chat and we will choose randomly to be answered by the speakers. And then you can ask question in Indonesian setting or English setting. We will translate it into appropriate language of the speakers. And then every speakers will have time approximately 20 minutes to sharing the material. Baik, kita akan mulai dengan pembicara kita yang pertama. It's gonna be time that we are really wait for. The first speakers, Prof. Paul Arbon, AM, FACN, and FAAN, with the material, with the topic complex emergencies, responding to the cascading and unexpected consequences of disaster. But before, please allow me to read about Professor Paul under Arbon CV. So actually, when I read the CV, it is so many things that we are really proud with him. So currently position Matthew Flinders, Distinguished Professor in Flinders University, and then Director Torrance Resilience Institute, Flinders University also, and Director World Health Organization Collaborating Center for Mass Gatherings and Global Health Security, and then Vice Chair of WHO World Health Emergencies, Health Security and Interface Technical Advisory Group, and then member of a roster of expert international health regulations, so many, and then so many awards also. And then also he mentioned me about publication. So it is 15 publication, and 90% is the topic is related to this disaster. So we are proud to be inviting Professor Paul Arbon AM to give the material. So Mr. Paul, time is yours.
Thank you. I'll just start off by saying what a pleasure it is to be speaking in Indonesia again, and what a shame it has been that it is still difficult to travel. I have spent a lot of time in Indonesia over recent years, and it would be great to get back. I will try to share my screen if that is okay, and we'll start the presentation. Please let me know if you can't see what is happening here. Okay, today we wanted to talk about the cascading and unexpected consequences of disasters, and that's increasingly important because disasters are no longer simple events. They're no longer events that are just about the wildfire or the earthquake or the volcanic eruption. They are events that actually capture and break a whole lot of systems in our communities. So we think about disasters a little differently in these days. There are various reasons for that. First of all, disasters have a much greater impact on us today.
Excuse me, Professor Paul.
Yeah.
Can we see this slide, please?
I'm sorry, I thought you could.
Yeah, it is okay for the committee to see the slide.
What can you see at the moment?
Teman-teman panitia, apakah bisa kita share slide?
Let me try that. Is that better? What can you see now?
Yeah, we can see it now. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for letting me know. The technology is challenging. Okay, so if we talk about cascading and unexpected consequences of disaster, the first thing that I need to say about that is that the reason disasters are different globally now is in part due to the fact that our countries, our nation states, are much more interconnected and interdependent than they have been in the past. And so many disasters affect important systems that we depend upon to be safe and to stay healthy. For example, if a supply chain, if a logistics arrangement is disrupted by severe flooding or by the closure of air transport routes, that has an effect on countries at some distance from the country that was immediately affected by the disaster. So disasters have widespread effects today that they didn't have many years ago. So today I want to talk a bit about how we understand that scenario and what we can do about it. We will talk a good deal about COVID-19. COVID-19 is an excellent example of that kind of global impact that can affect countries all over the world, even though the event may have initially occurred in one place. If we talk about risk and disruption, it's important also to note that the impact of these events is growing. We see, arguably, we may not be seeing more disaster events, more incidents. We don't necessarily see more cyclones or more earthquakes, more landslides, but we see more damage occurring as a result. So an event that once was considered to be relatively minor can now break systems, affect roadways and communities and reservoirs, water storage, all sorts of structures that once would not have been affected by that same event. So as the world becomes more crowded, more dependent on technology, more built up, it's easier for an emergency event to break the systems that we depend upon for our communities to continue to work. So the impact of these catastrophes is growing. We are seeing a much greater effect from the events that occur around the world. The World Economic Forum is a really good source of information about what the disaster events are that are happening globally and what the risk of future events might be. And every year, the World Economic Forum releases a global risks report. And this slide comes from the 2021 Global Risks Report and describes the kinds of emergencies that we see becoming more likely and indeed more impactful in the coming years. In the first box, the list describes the 5 most likely, clear and present dangers. These are the emergencies that we know can occur, we know are occurring, and that are a focus of emergency management, preparedness and response. They include, of course, infectious diseases, but in this case, we're really talking about novel and emerging infectious diseases. To some extent, we're thinking about those diseases where we do not yet have sufficient vaccination cover, and there are still some concerns around diseases like dengue and malaria and measles. But the novel and emerging infectious diseases, MERS coronavirus, the SARS outbreak, and influenza still, and of course COVID-19 are current and important clear and present dangers. The second most significant group is of course extreme weather events, and you will all be aware that the impact of extreme weather, whether that is through storms, cyclone, hurricane, typhoon, or whether it is extreme temperatures, and in particular heat waves, continue to really challenge communities and cause a great deal of concern for health services. The next ones on the list are perhaps less in the forefront of your minds as health practitioners, but they are important to health because they can affect health significantly. First one, cybersecurity failure, has already affected health systems across the globe, and protecting our ability to maintain the digital systems that drive our hospitals is increasingly important. That isn't just patient records. You will be aware that almost everything inside of your hospital is likely to be run by some digital system, whether that's air conditioning, water supply or water purification, theatre suites, pharmacy. A whole lot of systems depend on digital support. And so cybersecurity failure is increasingly a potential emergency for the health system. Terrorist attacks, again, a current and present danger in many parts of the world, and continuing. And conflict zones, of course, should be added to that list. And the last one is quite interesting because it is social cohesion, and that's important because we see some of the trust in medicine and reliance on scientific evidence being eroded during emergencies like COVID-19. We see people less certain about whether they should listen to public health officials, less certain about whether the vaccine is safe, less certain about whether the precautions that we're taking are really necessary. And that erosion of social cohesion, of social support, is increasingly one of the factors in emergencies that we see in the current world. When we talk about knock-on effects, we're talking about the effects that can occur when the emergency damages systems and causes problems that we were not expecting. So infrastructure breakdown as a result of cyber attack is an example. The fracture of the good relationships between countries and interstate conflict is another example. And the politicization of resources, water supply, food, commodities, the price of goods and services are all effects of emergencies that are beginning to be seen across the world. And then the final set that the World Economic Forum argues is important to us in thinking about disasters in these days relates to the so-called existential threats. That's an unusual word to use, but generally it's considered to mean those threats that might have a global impact on the survival, in fact, of humanity, the survival of humans on the earth are existential threats. And emerging at the moment, we see increased development and use of the so-called weapons of mass destruction. They include chemical and biological and radiological, the so-called CBRN agents, and we've seen a re-emergence of that threat in certain parts of the world. Adverse technology advances. This is the story of the dual use of technology. The fact that we can now bioengineer, genetically engineer certain substances and medicines is a wonderful technology, but also it allows us to bioengineer weapons that threaten the human population. So there is some concern about the potential dual use of new technologies. And as I said before, the last existential threat is increasingly the fact that communities don't trust our science. They don't trust scientists in the way that they used to. So that's the World Economic Forum's view. Next, I just wanted to show you this slide, which talks about how disasters actually work. And I want to do that briefly because it clarifies our thinking about what a disaster really is. What is a disaster? What is not? This comes from the World Association for Disaster and Emergency Medicine. It's an old framework, an old publication of Wadham. And at the top of the diagram, you can see that it starts by thinking about what the hazard is. If there is no hazard, there cannot be, at the bottom of the chain, a disaster. So a hazard is, for example, an extensive forest surrounding a community. A hazard is a volcano. A hazard might be an earthquake fault line. An event is not the hazard itself. An event is when the hazard releases energy and becomes an event. So a forest that catches fire, the fire is the event. And there is, of course, a risk associated with that. There is a risk that the hazard will turn into an event. It might be a high risk, it might be a low risk. In summer, in some countries, in hot weather, in dry conditions, the risk of the forest catching fire and turning into a forest fire is obviously quite high. But also we need to think about the likelihood of damage. And that's important because many disaster events, many of the things that people talk about as disasters don't actually cause damage. And Australia is a really good example of that scenario, because in Australia we can have disaster events like forest fires that can burn for days and weeks without actually impacting on infrastructure or communities. So there is no damage. Therefore, there is no disaster. If, however, that event impacts on a community or on essential infrastructure, it causes what we refer to as changes in function. So changes in function means the water supply is damaged, the health system is damaged, we're unable to get food supply or essential medicines. The function of our community has changed in some way. And that causes needs. And if those needs exceed the capacity of that community, then we believe that we have a disaster. And as all of you will know, disasters are defined as those events, broadly speaking, those events that require outside assistance because the community's ability to respond is overwhelmed. So that would be the World Association for Disaster and Emergency Medicine's view about how disasters actually roll out and work. So that's a disaster. What do we know today? Well, we know that disasters are increasingly events that are systemic. They don't just happen locally. The incident happens locally, the event happens locally, but the effects are regional or national or global in impacts. And we see that with COVID-19, we saw that with the Ebola outbreak in West Africa, we saw that with SARS, we saw that with a few volcanic eruptions that have disrupted international travel and so on. They have these bigger effects that we need to think about because health is affected as well. So in thinking about what those effects are and what those interconnections are, there are a few lenses that you can use. The first of those is to think about what essential societal systems are. And we talk about these systems as being the things we depend on for our community to work, for it to be safe and healthy. And we clearly need public health and medical care, which is where we live, but we also need communications, we need a functioning government, we need access to food and nutrition, we need infrastructure like water supply, we need shelter and logistics. All of those things around the outside of this diagram are essential for the community to work. And when we go into a disaster zone, what we typically do in our rapid assessment of a disaster is to measure the status of each of these pieces. We will look at the health system and see how damaged it is. We'll look at the water supply and see whether we need to supply more water or whether we can fix the system that's been damaged, and so on and so on. So that is a typical disaster response. But the reason this slide is important is that in modern emergencies, often, the local community doesn't supply these things. It receives these services from somewhere else. And if there is damage somewhere else, the local community can also be affected. I am moving quite quickly through those ideas, but I'll take some questions at the end and you might want to send me questions at some other time. So what else do we have to think about? Well, today, disasters are also often surprising. People talk about black swans and Thanksgiving turkeys. They talk about those things because actually today we often can't predict that a disaster is going to happen. A black swan is a disaster event that occurs that was unexpected and unplanned for. So a sudden terrorist attack, arguably, could be a black swan. The global impact of COVID-19 could be a black swan. It may be that your local plans never really considered an event of this scope and scale and impact. So we would think about that as a black swan. These are events that don't appear in our disaster plan. So what do we do about that? Well, typically around the world, people now talk about trying to build more resilient systems. We do that because we want a system that has the capacity and capability to respond effectively, regardless of what the event actually is. So if it's a wildfire, if it's COVID-19, if it's an earthquake, we have a system that is strong enough to respond and has what it needs. So we have a functioning emergency department, we have a functioning pharmacy, we have generator power for our hospital, we have a communication system, we can call up staff at short notice. All of those things are about a more robust and capable system, and it doesn't actually matter so much what the emergency is, as long as the system is strong. And that's become a very real focus of emergency planning in these days. So in health systems and in other places, in thinking about how we build those things, we focus on this list. We think about how we can understand what is vulnerable, what is more likely to break, what is valuable, what are the things that we really need to continue to work, that people think are most important, who's responsible for those things, what network and partnerships do we have that supply those things, how connected are we to people that might come and help us, what awareness do staff have about how to run in an emergency, and what skills do our people need in order to have that capacity and capability to work in a disaster. And then when we think about a resilient system that has been built to sustain itself regardless of the event, we can start to cope with these sorts of events that are completely unexpected. The so-called here be dragons. This phrase is used in emergency management to refer to the fact that we know what some of the risks are. We know that we don't know about some of the risks. We don't know, for example, what the next novel emerging infectious disease will be, like COVID-19. We don't know which animal or environmental cause might lead to a jump of an infectious disease into the human population. But we know that that can happen. And thirdly, in the here be dragons context, people talk about the unknown unknowns. So the known unknowns, there are some things I know I don't know. The unknown unknowns are those things that I just haven't thought about. Those events, once again, we can't prepare for. We can only do our best to build the strength of our system so that when something unexpected, surprising, unknown actually happens, we have some capacity to deal with it. And so my final slide is a list of the things that you might think about in preparing your health system to cope with whatever might happen. The unthinkable, if you like, how to manage the things that you haven't even thought about that can impact on your health system. And this is the list that, part of the list that people use. First is to identify and protect what really matters. Often we try and protect everything, but think about the things that must function in your organisation. And you can do that by looking at the dependencies across the system. You can't run theatres if you don't have beds to send patients to. You can't run theatres if you don't have pharmacy equipped with the kinds of medications and support you need to run the pharmacy, and so on, those kinds of questions. Focus on your management culture. The thing that often breaks management in healthcare is when it is hierarchical, when you need to get permission from the very top to take an emergency action, because then you can't do anything. So in emergencies, think about how your management culture works. Improve your situational awareness so that you notice smaller signals and your staff will tell you about them sooner. Prepare for the things you're not able to predict. That's about strengthening the system. I've talked about that. Protect your capacity and capability. Don't just strengthen your system, but protect and nurture and build, have caches, have supply of the things you really need. Encourage trusted accountability and what we call constructive disobedience. And that's a very uncomfortable thing, because constructive disobedience is allowing staff to make decisions outside of policy if they see an emergency happening and somebody has to take action right now. So it is about allowing staff to be trusted to take a decision that isn't in the policy. And that's quite hard to do, obviously, but we've seen so many big disasters occur just because an individual, middle management or other staff member couldn't take a decision because they didn't have permission. Don't seek certainty in your plans, don't over-plan your disaster plans, because as soon as the event occurs, your plan in effect is redundant and you need to start responding to what is actually happening. Focus on capability. Importantly, practice moving from normal daily business, from what I call slow time, to quick time. Actually practice how you can rapidly upscale the way in which your department is working. Promote self-organising autonomous teams as much as you can. And finally, think about worst case scenarios. Spend some time sitting in a room, thinking about what could happen, thinking about what the worst result could possibly be. And if you plan for that kind of result, then you'll be fine, regardless almost of what else happens. So think about worst case scenarios and use those in your disaster planning. So overall, that's a bit of a talk about how we understand disasters today. And in summary, I would just say the world is changing. No disaster is simply a natural disaster anymore. Disasters impact on systems, not just on the local environment. And we need to think about building capacity and capability so that we can respond to the next disaster, regardless of what it is, and because we probably don't know what it's going to be. So thank you very much. I'll just stop sharing and invite you to ask any questions if there's any time left to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Paul, for explanation and sharing for the some knowledge and some trick. Okay, before coming to the second speaker, I would like to highlight something related to the Professor Paul explained just now. Jadi mungkin ada beberapa yang kita highlight pada partisipan. Jadi topik ini menanggapi konsekuensi bencana yang berdatangan dan tidak terduga. Ada beberapa hal yang mungkin perlu kita lihat di sini supaya nanti terstimulus untuk bertanya kepada partisipan. Jadi hal-hal yang kita mesti perhatikan di sini adalah dampak bencana itu sangat besar dan dampaknya kemudian juga berjangka panjang dan sangat signifikan. Namun perencanaan kesiapsiagaan sangat dibutuhkan di sini. Dan banyak hal tadi terkait dengan dampaknya ada penyakit infeksi, cuaca yang ekstrim, kemudian serangan teroris, masalah di masyarakat, kerusakan bangunan. Jadi banyak sekali dampaknya sehingga kita perlu memanage kejadian-kejadian yang tidak terfikirkan atau tidak terduga. Nah, di sini fokusnya adalah kesiapsiagaan dan perencanaan dari awal dari kita semua. Karena interaksi kompleks di sini sangat dibutuhkan, kita tidak bisa berencana atau melaksanakannya sendiri, namun perlu koordinasi dan kontrol terhadap apa yang akan kita rencanakan. Oke, mungkin itu sedikit yang saya akan highlight untuk hal-hal yang disampaikan oleh Profesor Paul tadi. Oke, Professor Paul, thank you very much for sharing us. And then we are coming for the second speaker. We would like to invite Assistant Professor Dr. Pratuma Rithpho. But before, I would like to read the CV of her. So we are really proud that Assistant Professor Dr. Pratuma have some achievement also. Like she is also graduate from the Bachelor of Nursing Science from Narasumber University, Thailand, and then graduate Master of Nursing Science in the Faculty of Nursing Chiang Mai University, Thailand, and PhD on the Chiang Mai University, Thailand also. And so many short course and training and also conference also achieved by Dr. Pratuma, and also experience So she is a staff nurse in patient department in Romchat Hospital, Nakhon Sawan, Thailand. And then until present, she is a lecturer sub-department of adult nursing and sub-department of maternal and newborn nursing. Department of Nursing, Faculty of Nursing, Naresuan University, Pitsanulok, Thailand. And then the area interest is HIV, women health nursing, maternal and fetal health, sexually transmitted disease, vulnerable population, midwifery nursing. And also she had so many books here. Maybe I can mention it one by one, but I just found it. It is 27 books by Dr. Rithpho. Okay. And then so many publication also. Presentation poster, guest speaker also, editorial report, journal reviewer also, and so many things that we can mention it one by one. So to simple time, we would like to invite Dr. Pratuma Rithpho. Can you hear my voice?
Yes, okay. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Sure, it's really clearly.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Time is yours.
Yes, good morning, the great speaker, the committee, and the participants. I also appreciate to be a speaker of this seminar, and I'm waiting to visit your country again. I really impressed Indonesia, especially Bromo and Borobudur Temple. Today, this is my topic. You know that's the most women and girls need center to respond effort protection. Disaster is an event that result is great harm, damage, and death. Serious difficult. It is a sudden event such as accident or natural catastrophe that cause great damage or loss life. You can see this picture that you face many disaster. About the natural disaster, that's my responsibility today. It is the that may cause loss of life, injury, and other health impact, property damage. In your country, I think that you are facing several disasters like Thailand, such as tsunami, flooding, typhoon. Or now we facing pandemic. All country around the world, and in Indonesia, I think your country is facing volcanic eruption also, and I watched the news about the Mount Sumeru volcanic eruption in January. Yeah, this is my experience. Yeah, I have experience to study in Houston, Texas. And I traveled to the USA several times. I have learned how to survive when I face with disaster, especially hurricane and flash flood. I studied in this city after Hurricane Katrina attacked this, and I got the certificate of hurricane preparedness. I have learned how to survive when hurricane. In Texas, it has a hurricane center to provide information, facility, and so on. This center has several plans to protect people live as emergency supply, warning sign, communication, and fast list in our area, evacuation routes, weather alert, and some special suggestions such as keeping important documents in a waterproof containers. You can apply this protocol, this suggestion to your country, and you should create a protocol for each disaster. This is you can see the picture in Texas, Houston. This is the flood, the Katrina destroyed the city, and you can see the evacuee. This is I learned that this is a stadium that I should move on when hurricane contact this city. The Reliance Center operates for rescue in preparedness of Hurricane Ike and Katrina. This astrodome open to up to 11,000 more evacuees and several volunteers to help up this speed. The center operates the bus to pick up the refugee, and the city provide the cloth, the blanket, and the supply for the evacuee. When you're facing with some disaster situation, you might consider evacuate or stay. You cannot stay in some situations such as landslide, flooding, volcanic eruption. On the other hand, you might consider stay or evacuate. I also show the largest evacuee in the USA. This picture estimates more than 1.5 or 3 million evacuees. They are trying to move to another city. They worry about Katrina hurricane. This type of evacuee put a state on the roadway infrastructure that's what not built to handle for the evacuation volume. They are started on the roads around 36 hours tied to freelance. Now we have a good technologies to get your people information to predict hurricane, typhoon, or earthquake, how to stay or evacuate. And it is important to know when not to evacuate. Therefore, you should consider about research and forecasting of this disaster in your country. About the effect of disaster on pregnant women, newborn, and infants. Pregnant women immune system make them more vulnerable to disease, and their nutrition needs are greater. Therefore, the mother body is trying to prepare the children to become more alert and more reactive, so they will be able to deal with the environment more appropriately. Pregnant women, newborn, and infants may be harmed with natural disaster when occur. The lack of resources, such as clean water, a lack of access to care and medication, you should think about. And every disaster they must facing with psychological stress. That I saw the schedule that some professor will speak. We'll talk about this condition, and you should think more about the condition of pregnant women, about the morbidity and comorbidity disorder, PIS, GDM, anemia, authors. If you try to protect them, you should try to prepare yourself and your system to support them well. And you should think about the history of pregnancy, previous CSA, PPS, and so on. If they must move to another brand, you should try to conduct the operation room for them also. According to the former study, this is systematic review. In 2010, they found that disaster-related serious complication among pregnant women. Or you can study more. Almost all students at that topic indicates that women are more prone and post-disaster psychopathology than men. And pregnant postpartum women may be especially vulnerable to the mental health consequence of disaster. Those complications of disaster include stillbirth, IUGR, and maybe some defect, and maybe low birth weight, depression. Disaster have different or maybe a similar of outcome. I think relief workers such as nurse, clinicians should concentrate on the most exposed women, particularly with respect to mental health. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists in 2010 present that preparing disaster in women or pregnant women. This is the recommendation related the former information. When women have fever resource, physical and emotional, they get harder. Maybe sometimes the impact of evacuation they stay in the rooftop or some disaster, and maybe they're sitting in the shelter going to 2 or 3 days without any food, or maybe more profound. And you should think about the spontaneous abortion when they are evacuated. Many research in kids show that stress of disaster can cause long-lasting damage, that they are mild. There is good reason for mother in stateful environment to produce higher stage child. Children born from those mothers who have different cognitive, neurobehavioral, or psychological impact. They are more reactive and more anxious, more fearful, and more likely to be aggressive. This is empirical, show that the negative effect in our developing country have maybe increasingly. This Easter can be stateful among pregnant or caring for an infant. Making plan ahead of time and knowing what to do when a disaster occurs can help and keep them safe during emergency. The needs of vulnerability of women, infants, and children during disaster need the support. That's ACOG summarize that they need a local healthcare facilities such as ANC, LR, OR, PP, and family planning. And you should think more about the establishing and maintaining lactation before, during, and after disaster. Decreasing the number of unintended pregnancy when they stay at the camp together, maybe they have a problem of this case. And we should think about the reducing sexual assault, and should be provide a safe and secure environment in evacuation shelter. And emergency contraceptive, sexual assault, forensic examination, or sexual assault nurse examination. Some disaster situation, you need field hospital, and you must create and conduct field hospital suitable for pregnant women or postpartum women, because some disasters long time. And you should think that how they continue taking their nursing intervention such as vitamin that you should give to them, protect them from infection and danger. This is maybe have several few hospital that you can apply. It's not easy to write a plan for college education your people and healthcare staff, those who manage the serious situation. The question is, are we willing to change the outcome before it does? About the emergency preparedness for women and infants, I summarize that you choose guide special disaster for this group, special and different disaster, different protocol, and encourage patients to develop evacuation plan in the event of disaster. And you must inform pregnant patients on the sign of preterm labor and other obstetric emergency. Work with public health officials to identify facilities that can provide prenatal and obstetric service in disaster. You must encourage patients to develop emergency kit, because some women stay at allow the volcano. You must teach them about this, and you must promote lactation because we have about delimited of supplier clean water or something like that. Lactation is the good way to support newborn, and encourage local and state government to provide facilities that are safe and secure for women and children. And you must inform and be aware sign mental distress and promote prompt attention mental health need. And you must integrate and mainstream the disaster response service. This is the example of emergency birth kit for patient. Maybe you can apply and you prepare in the disaster area. I told you that you must know that one size fit all emergency plan is difficult to apply to all disaster. Pregnant women should be encouraged to develop evacuation plan and forewarning to allow to evacuation. When evacuation is not possible, the healthcare of women in the antepartum, interpartum, and postpartum period need to be safety management. The staff should increase patient awareness of signs of complication. Furthermore, there are several factors that may contribute difficult access to obstetric health care facility during disaster. You must enhance your emergency member performance about the staff to support pregnant women, OBGYN staff, anesthetician when you have a operation room in a field hospital. Volunteer. I show my student picture because they have a knowledge of midwifery knowledge or maternal and child knowledge. Maybe you should invite them to join about your to be the member of emergency disaster. And also government staff, police, soldier, and shelter staff. You think about the holistic, consider about the risk, stillbirth, premature infant. They have two lives that you should think more. Some situations have a problem about when they give birth in the during disaster. They might have a complication of hemorrhage and retained placenta. You should think how to save their life. And you must conduct effective system, facility, resource, communication, and laboratory response. About nurse, how nurse should do at antenatal care, LR, and all setting related pregnant women. You are the key people of policy, strategy, and service during disaster among women. You must, you are the key person. You are the leader. You must think about how to prepare to support them. And then you establish local facility where prenatal care and obstetric service can be provided for those women unable to evacuate. Medical records. You should think more about the medical record or electronic medical record. Some situations you could not record via electronic because we don't have electricity. And you must working to ensure that accurate information and increase patient awareness of pregnancy complication. This is the pink book that you should tell them to keep when they go to everywhere around the world. Yeah, your pregnant, your customer. And you must consider the need to access the availability of emergency medical assistance. And then maybe in the future, you must create the family communication plan, how much and their family will contact on another and what step you will take a different type of situation. And preparedness, emergency kits. I show this is some primary healthcare sector. I think Indonesia and Thailand, we are the same. We are developing country and we are suffer more and less chronic from natural disaster due to ineffective communication combined with insufficient budgets allocate for disaster prevention and management. Disaster management and primary healthcare is the first step to handle every disaster among pregnant women also. That's you need to enhance them to integrate the intervention and the step to support vulnerable people to this place. You should provide an opportunity mainstream response service with primary health care, and you should provide needs emergency medical assistance, minimum disaster management, and you must preparing household facility and communication of community of is disaster. And you must conduct effective referral system, the bus, helicopter, or everything that you must try to put in your protocol. I would like to show some disaster. This is pandemic disaster in our country also. COVID pandemic disaster. COVID-19. That according to this disaster of this time, I would like to show the serious pandemic that around the world we facing. As at this situation, UNFPD share the synthesis, the limited of evidence on the list of this group, as well as the preventive measure and supportive therapy recommended. Sexual reproductive health is a significant topic that you should think more. World Health Organization try to give the suggestion for preparedness for this disaster. We might fight a long time with this situation. I use the distancing, mask wearing, hand washing. I think your country also apply for protect your pregnant women also. And we have application for this group. And we have the protocol COVID-19 among pregnant women. This I show some example in my country also. This picture from some province in Thailand that we have many Myanmar workers in this area, and they are infected COVID-19 with premature contraction with IUGR. They prepare our staff try to prepare well. They are protect how to prevent infection to themselves and newborn. They practice resuscitate, try to practice up if the newborn have a problem because newborn has IUGR, and we must try to protect themselves also. Obstetric care at the designated facility is idea, and it is the low public health official in an area designed to equip obstetric. That you must try to prepare. I think you work well and you have a high list of vaccination. I appreciate. The picture show the normal delivery preparedness and involve this setting because this hospital is my practicum field. The traditional attendants have also high skill, and the staff must protect themselves from COVID-19 because if they infected or maybe they are under PUI, we must have facing with midwifery shortage because they are have a self quarantine. You should prepare staff and LR facility completely. The conduct new LR room for PUI patient. It is we try to conduct new LR room for patient, and we practice that how to give birth. Lesson learned from COVID-19 pandemic disaster. I summarize every disaster have a problem. We must stand together in solidarity, fight stigma and discrimination, and ensure that people get the information and services they need. And I have learned that we must develop. This is the new pandemic disaster that we must develop and offering relevant continuing medical education course, and developing a tailor model or web-based training program for healthcare provider on different aspects, and arrange training course and impacting P and in-service training on the standard competency. We have optician association that we try to follow them. This is when you have a disaster, you must think more about how to support them, such as antenatal care units. You must think more about the facility, and you must put on the equipment or instrument of your disasters as vitamin and maybe some instrument that you must serve it to them. That you should prepare yourself well. And maybe you should think the information that you should give to them when they are sex service. when they're facing with disasters, such as learn about safety and evacuation procedure, take medicine training, and first aid or CPR, identify meet-up spot for family in case they separate or cannot leave home, know the location about the place that they are baby. Okay, this is the facility in LR. That's I follow this organization. The guideline, this is for COVID-19 also, and we try to have a guideline for some disaster situation. You must think about the equipment that important in the LR room, such as a birth kit or some medicine, some medication such as magnesium sulfate, Vicrinil, or maybe oxytocin. You must prepare for support them well. About the facility in postpartum, you must think more about the how to protect them from the sub-temperature, or maybe you should enhance them to do breastfeeding, because I already told you that we have limited everything when we have this disaster situation, such as they evacuate from volcanic eruption, they move to field hospital. They should nurse their baby with their bed milk is good. Okay. In conclusion, disasters are unplanned, but we are anticipate. Emergency preparedness is essential to maintain healthy pregnancy and ensure good outcome for pregnant women and their infants who ensure disaster. Involved in disaster situation cause and exacerbate tremendous anxiety and depression that you should timely evaluate them. If evacuation is not possible, identify local healthcare facility that can provide obstetric care. Discuss the available of emergency birth kit or something like that. I think female healthcare provider need to advise, assist, and support public health authority in plan for service during disaster. This is my when you are a mother, this is my last slide. When you are a mother, you are never really alone in your thought. A mother always has to think twice, one for herself and one for her child. And anywhere, this is my idea. When you are a nurse who take care of pregnant women during disaster, you always have to think holistic, how to save them perfectly. Okay, thank you very much. This is my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pratuma. Makunaka.
Thank you very much. Okay, I can stop my. Okay, Charlie.
Okay. Dr. Pratuma, allow me to give a highlight that for your presentation. Jadi partisipan yang berbahagia, pada pembicaraan yang kedua ini kita bicara tentang bencana, di mana Dr. Pratuma sudah menerangkan di sini ada dua macam bencana atau disaster, yaitu alami seperti erupsi gunung, gempa bumi, banjir, dan sebagainya. Dan ada juga yang bencana yang disebabkan oleh tangan manusia seperti kebakaran, kemudian bencana industri, perang, dan yang lain-lainnya. Di sini yang perlu kita highlight adalah dari bencana itu banyak hal yang bisa kita persiapkan, dan bencana ini juga hampir sama antara Indonesia dengan Thailand. Dan di sini yang kita perlukan adalah teknologi yang memadai untuk memperingatkan atau memberikan informasi kepada masyarakat supaya terhindar dari dampak yang lebih besar. Nah, sebagai seorang perawat di sini apa yang kita perlu persiapkan adalah pelayanan kesehatan lokal, apa yang kita bisa laksanakan sebelum terjadinya bencana atau di saat terjadinya bencana. Kemudian juga kita memerlukan juga di sini integrasi sistem, dan sudah disampaikan juga oleh Prof. Paul tadi bahwa integrated sistem ini sangat dibutuhkan karena perawat tidak bisa melaksanakan atau melakukan implementasi keperawatannya dengan sendiri. Terus kemudian yang mesti kita lihat di sini juga adalah fasilitas pengetahuan dan keterampilan. Terkait dengan pandemi, di sini banyak juga hal yang bisa kita pelajari seperti meningkatnya atau berkembangnya tentang panduan, kemudian training, ilmu, pengetahuan terhadap pandemi dan penata laksanaannya. Kemudian juga meningkatkan penyusunan terhadap materi-materi penata laksanaan pandemi. Mungkin itu yang bisa saya highlight untuk pembicaraan yang kedua. Silahkan saya ingatkan kembali kepada partisipan, jika ada pertanyaan yang ingin disampaikan pada pembicara pertama dan kedua, silahkan ditulis di kolom chat, baik itu yang berbahasa Indonesia ataupun nanti yang berbahasa Inggris. Kita akan sampaikan atau kita tujukan kepada kedua pembicara kita sebelumnya dengan bahasa yang disesuaikan. Terima kasih. So we would like to invite our third speaker today. So here our third speaker is Bapak Yudi Arista Chandra. Oke, selamat pagi Bapak.
Oke, selamat pagi.
Selamat pagi. Baik, izinkan Bapak saya membacakan CV Bapak sebelumnya. Nama beliau adalah Yudi Arista Chandra dan di sini beliau lengkap melampirkan media sosial yang nanti bisa diikuti oleh partisipan semua. Di IG itu @ya_chandra, kemudian Twitter beliau @chandra_ya, kemudian Facebook beliau Yudi Arista Chandra. Kemudian email beliau yudi.chandra0904@gmail.com, lengkap ya. Kemudian bisa saya sampaikan di sini bahwa riwayat pendidikan beliau dari yang terakhir atau terkini, beliau adalah mahasiswa dari Program for Disaster Nursing, Graduate School of Nursing, University of Kochi. Benar, Pak? Takut salah
benar, Ibu.
Kemudian beliau menamatkan pendidikan profesi keperawatan di Fakultas Keperawatan Universitas Indonesia pada tahun 2011. Kemudian sarjana keperawatannya juga dari Universitas Indonesia tahun 2010. Kemudian pekerjaan beliau 2019 sampai sekarang itu Graduate School of Nursing, University of Kochi, asisten peneliti profesor. Kemudian 2012 sampai sekarang juga Departemen Keperawatan Jiwa, Fakultas Ilmu Keperawatan Universitas Indonesia. Saat ini beliau sedang ditugas belajarkan. Kemudian 2010 sampai 2012 Nusantara Professional Education, Kepala Divisi Pelatihan Kesehatan. Nah, kemudian organisasi yang beliau geluti ini saya baca sangat banyak sekali. Sekarang ini beliau adalah pengurus Pusat Persatuan Pelajar Indonesia di Jepang atau PPI Jepang, beliau adalah ketua umumnya. Kemudian 2019 sampai 2020 Badan Pengawas PPI Jepang. Kemudian 2018 sampai 2019 itu PPI Jepang Porda Shikoku. 2015 sampai 2017 itu beliau adalah Dewan Pengurus Wilayah Persatuan Perawat Nasional Indonesia DPW PPNI DKI Jakarta. Masih banyak sekali organisasi yang beliau telah geluti, ILMIKI juga, kemudian PPNI juga, kemudian BMFIK UI juga. Kemudian penelitian beliau juga sangat banyak. Di sini areanya adalah disaster mental health, kemudian disaster prone area in Indonesia juga, Merapi eruption juga pernah dijadikan penelitian, kemudian nursing leader awareness juga pernah menjadi penelitian beliau. Kemudian post-traumatic stress syndrome juga banyak sekali, dan pengaduan masyarakat beliau juga sangat banyak. Dan publikasi beliau sudah menerbitkan 4 buku di sini, yaitu Standar Praktik Keperawatan Manajemen Resiko Bencana, kemudian Fakultas Ilmu Keperawatan Universitas Indonesia Perjalanan 30 Tahun Merawat Bangsa. Kemudian kerangka kerja IGN pada keperawatan bencana, kemudian panduan rekrutmen dan retensi perawat serta kebijakan migrasi perawat di tanah air. Jurnal ilmiah beliau juga sangat banyak, kemudian presentasi luar negeri beliau di Jepang, kemudian di Jerman, di Seoul, Korea. We are so proud of you, Pak Yudi. Baik, untuk mempersingkat waktu, saya persilakan kepada Pak Yudi untuk menyampaikan materinya dengan topik The Needs of Elderly During Difficulties and Natural Disaster. Silakan, Pak.
Okay, thank you so much, Bu Yelmi, for
Welcome,
introduction. And thank you so much to the honorable speaker as well as to the all participants. Thank you so much for the committee for inviting me, giving chance to share my experience as well as my knowledge. Okay, now we would like to talk about the needs of elderly during difficulties in natural disaster. Next slide, please. Okay, why this issue is really important? Because for information, and maybe all of you already know that globally population of elderly is rising drastically. It was more than 600 million in 2005, and it is estimated will be double in 2025, 4 years later, and will be more than 2 billion in 2050. So we have to take care and concern about this kind of population, particularly in developing countries such as in Indonesia. Our aging population is also increasing. Nowadays, more around 9.7% of population in Indonesia are elderly person. And the second one, it is considered as the most vulnerable group. I guess you already really aware about these things. And impact of disaster increase elderly person vulnerability and exacerbate well-controlled chronic diseases. I mean to say that to those that have chronic illness before disaster, when they face difficulties during disaster, these diseases usually getting worsened. And then according to the all literature, it showed that natural disaster reduce the quality of life of elderly. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, could you help me, because my internet connection is sometimes unstable, so that's why I would like to ask the help of committee. Okay, thank you. This is what we would like to discuss this occasion. As you know that when we facing the natural disaster or any kind of disaster, it will cause inability to meet the expenses incurred by the disaster, and usually, particularly in large scale of disaster, they will lose of material as well as loss of home. So that's why they are forced to move to another places. And this relocation or staying in temporary housing shelter make a lot of impact to the elderly people. They will it will decrease the health status, as well as it will disrupt the access to the medication, will cause psychological stress and exhaustion, and these all things will worsen the health status of the elderly. Okay, next slide, please. According to the Pan American Health Organization, we can divide it some factors that affect degree of severity of elderly in disaster. Each elderly has their own health condition as well as problem. That's why we have to make sure to register all the elderly person when we handle them during the disaster. And then also each hazard has a specific health impact that differ from one to another. For example, volcanic eruption causes many burn ulcer, when earthquake can cause many bone fractures. And the large-scale impact of disaster will cause more risk to the elderly person. And disaster management systems in the area also influencing the degree of severity of the elderly impacted by disaster. The area that has more comprehensive disaster management system that integrate preventive measure for elderly group will have less risk for the elderly. Okay, next slide, please. From such literature, I found that several factors can influence vulnerability of the elderly during the disaster. We can divide it into two factors. First, individual factor and socio-cultural factors. For the elderly person that has pre-existing chronic diseases before the disaster, usually will get more vulnerable, will become more vulnerable during the disaster. Also, someone that have a mental health problem, and then also frailty of movement ability, frailty of vision and hearing, or another sensory system. These kinds of individual will have more vulnerable during the disaster. And also socio-cultural factors also impacting their vulnerability, such as poverty, like us, Indonesia, as the developing country, many of area when they facing the large-scale impact, large-scale disaster, they loss of their homes, loss of their income, and it will lead to the worst situation, particularly for the elderly. And also educational backgrounds implicate to the vulnerability of the elderly, because educational background for the communication before, during, and after the disaster requires careful consideration of how messages are prepared and delivered. And the literacy level also required to understand and act upon those things. So that's why the people that has the elderly with low level of education usually difficult to understand the information shared by the relief team. And the gender also, from the literature review, I found that the male older person, the male senior, usually has more vulnerable rather than the female older person, because usually the male person relies on their wife for prevention measure that's shared by the committee before the disaster. That's why when facing the disaster, they having less understanding about how to handling the situation, how to countermeasure the situation. And also the life change, and also family living arrangements. Nowadays, particularly like Indonesia, most of elderly person living with their family. But although family is the main source of support for many older persons, nowadays many elderly person also living independent. So for those that living independent, usually facing more difficulties rather than living with their family. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, actually, health issues in natural disaster are very characteristic from one type of hazard to another. But generally speaking, we can group it into four, like deterioration of physical and mental ability, and then also functional limitation, decreased sensory awareness, and mental health and psychosocial problem. However, we have to remember that these four problems may be as an impact of the disaster, or in other side, it is already occur, or they already get this kind of problem before the disaster. So it was like a kind of predisposition before the disaster, and then the disaster become a precipitation, and when the disaster occur, it becoming worse during the disaster. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is the some condition that can exacerbate or that can worsen the chronic illness of elderly during the disaster, such as medication and other supply are lost or destroyed, so they are difficult to access healthcare services. Food and water supply also inadequate, or because it is the access is disrupted. In some literature, I found that usually when the disaster occurred because of disruption of infrastructure like transportation access, usually the aid or relief assistant can reach the area around more than 24 hours. Even some area get relief assistant more than 1 week. And also health service and facilities are disrupted due to infrastructure damage. Okay, next slide. As we know that disaster also have a mental burden to elderly, and this is some condition that can exacerbate the mental condition, like having a pre-existing mental health problem, losses of beloved ones, material income in the disaster, and living in shelter with lack of privacy and sanitation, giving them more mental health burden and inadequate healthcare facilities. Okay, next slide. Now I would like to share about usually, as we know that most of or even all of survivors, when they face disaster situation, they are evacuated to the shelter. This is inappropriate situation for elderly in disaster, such as lack of risk management information regarding shelters and evacuation plans. In the concept of disaster risk reduction, we have to do risk reduction in every phase of disaster, including during and after the disaster. Providing risk management information are part of it. So that's why lack of risk management information is really give a vulnerability to the elderly person. And after that, no access or insufficient aid for disabled person. Elderly needs more privacy, water, and then also health care. Less of those things will lead to the stressful condition and impact to their health condition. And inappropriate bedding, like height and size of the cots, bedding, this bedding related to the risk of falls. Higher and smaller cots or bed or sleeping place will put more risk of falls to the elderly. And high level of noise, because noise will impact quality of sleep or rest for the elderly. That's why higher level of noise will put more risk to the elderly person. Okay, please remember that elderly persons are resources because they have a sense of previous disaster. They have the experience in previous disaster, particularly in disaster prone area like Indonesia, and they are also having survivor experiences as well. They have a possibility to take the leadership role because of their experiences, and they can provide care for grandchildren, sick or injured family members and neighbors. And we can also involve them as a volunteer within the community group. So that's why they can, or they have an opportunity to make a positive contribution during disaster as well. Okay. Next slide. So what can we do as a health professional during the disaster for the elderly persons? The principle proposed, in my humble opinion, there are three aims that we have to do that we can accomplish to help the elderly. For the first one, to reduce the injuries, the second one, to prevent the death, and the third one, to aid the recovery process. And some action required related to the medication, related to the care and protection, related to the nutrition, related to the communication and infrastructure. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, related to the medication, we have to conduct surveillance and register all the elderly person within the shelter to ensure they are registered to help them can access the healthcare needed. Access to the medication, why this is become a new topics, because access to the medication is major priority for the elderly persons. According to the literature, many mention that the average senior living at home takes more prescription, even they are taking around 3, even more than 3 or more than 5 prescription during a day. In the event of natural disaster, sudden loss of access to pharmacies can jeopardize senior lives. Even for seniors who require supplement oxygen, for example, or other electrical devices, loss of power can be life-threatening even. And then we can monitor medication. So that's why regarding this medication, we have to monitor the medication and label it properly. We have to store the medication properly, including ensure the security to prevent the unauthorized access and use, and to assist to administer their medication as required. Okay, next slide, please. Related to the care and protection, there are some several things that we can do, such as treat them with respect, dignity, and patience. As we know that quality, we have to put more concern to the quality of life to the elderly. So that's why treating them with respect and full dignity is really important in this situation. And we have to provide social activities or therapies to keep them engaged and happy. And after that, we have to monitor and keep records to those with specific needs and ensure those who are visually impaired or having frailty, physical ability or disability to give them supplementary aid. And we have to also ensure those with dementia are easy to identify to provide them special assistance. And regarding the nutrition, we can monitor their diet, particularly to whom with chronic illness. For example, someone that have hypertension, of course, we have to prevent them from lots of calories or from fat meals, for example. And then we can serve meals that are appropriate for those with special needs, such as diabetics. We have to give them less sugar meals, of course. And then we can also monitor their fluid balance to prevent dehydration. And then next slide, please. Related to the communication, we have to use a visual aids such as poster, brochure, or flyers to communicate key message in the shelter. Remember that too much information can overwhelm other person, especially those with cognitive impairment. So that's why we can provide communication simple, direct, and honest for the elder persons, and pay attention to any special communication needs, such as for person with hearing impaired condition. We can use paper and pens, and then we can also use pictures and symbols to make them easy to understand, and put all communication on notification boards like these examples, and regularly should be updated the content. Okay, related to the infrastructure, we can keep entrance free from the rubble, debris, and other obstruction, because these things are the risk for the elderly persons, and keep older person with their family unit at all times, because living with a family is typical cultures in Indonesia, and globally it gives them more spirit to survive. And also we have to improve access to or into bedrooms, because particularly for a family with the elderly member, we have to designate them close to the bedroom facilities, because they need more to go to the toilet. We have to provide ramps, rails, bed, seats in the shower to prevent the risk of falls. And the last one, we can have an adequate supply of coats and blankets to prevent hypothermia. And the next slide, please. Because my area is about the family, I would like to remind you that most of elderly person, as I said before, are living with their family during the disaster, and being with the family giving them more spirit and strength to survive. That's why it is really important to involve family caregiver in all intervention processes. And for the last slide, I would like to remind you about disaster risk reduction. It is really crucial also for the elderly person. Capacities in handling the disaster situation are determined the capacities in minimizing disaster risk. So that's why we have to do disaster risk reduction at all phases of disaster. Several actions for disaster risk reduction related to the elderly person, such as conduct vulnerability and capacity assessment as the baseline of planning and ongoing DRR activities. Second one, develop comprehensive community disaster plan that also address the needs of elderly persons and strengths to the mutual help capacity in the community. And we can also encourage and support the development of family disaster plans that incorporate the needs of elderly members. And the last one, as a part of DRR for the elderly, we can involve the elderly person as a volunteer in a post-disaster activities to make them to help them restore their emotional and psychological health. Okay, that's all about my explanation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I also happy to ask or address any question if you would like to. Thank you so much for my opportunity. Terima kasih. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Terima kasih Pak Yudi sharing ilmunya. Thank you Mr. Yudi. So please allow me to highlight some sentences which content with this slide to the participant. Baik, saya coba akan highlight beberapa poin penting dari yang sudah disampaikan Pak Yudi tadi, bahwa lansia ini juga mempunyai peran yang penting dalam bencana. Banyak faktor yang mempengaruhi, ada faktor individual, kemudian faktor sosial budaya, kemudian juga isu kesehatan umum pada lansia itu keterbatasan fungsi, kemudian kesehatan mental juga diperhatikan di sini. Dan banyak hal juga yang menjadi memperburuk penyakit kronis pada lansia dengan kondisi bencana ini. Kemudian apa yang kita harus lakukan dan kita perhatikan pada lansia ini adalah perlakukan lansianya mungkin dengan dihargai martabatnya, kemudian juga nutrisinya diperhatikan, komunikasinya, infrastruktur yang juga akan membantu dan menyelamatkan dari kondisi bencana. Nah, yang terakhir yang di-highlight oleh Pak Yudi yaitu memberi dukungan keluarga karena lansia di Indonesia khususnya itu masih tinggal dengan keluarga. Jadi silahkan dari materi-materi yang sudah disampaikan oleh pembicara kita yang pertama, kedua, dan ketiga, pembicara kita berkenan dan sangat senang hati menerima pertanyaan dari partisipan semua. So, again, I would like to inform you to invite some question from the first and second, also third speakers. If you have a question, please write it on the chat column, and then we will address it to the speakers. Ya, baik. So we would like to move to the fourth speakers. Kita akan masuk ke pembicara kita yang keempat, yang berbahagia Ibu Eni Nuraini. Selamat pagi, Ibu.
Ya, selamat siang ya, Mbak.
Selamat siang ya, sudah siang ya. Semangatnya masih pagi, Bu Eni.
Oh iya, oke.
Ya, baik, Bu. Sebelum masuk ke materi, Bu, izinkan saya membacakan kurikulum vitae Bu Eni dulu. Beliau adalah dosen keperawatan jiwa. Nama lengkap beliau di sini saya maaf tadi kurang belakangnya ya. Nurse Eni Nuraini Agustini S.Kep MSc PhD. Ini yang sangat penting yang terlupakan oleh saya. Give me apologize, Bu Eni. Beliau dari Prodi Ilmu Keperawatan Fakultas Ilmu Kesehatan UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta. Kemudian pendidikan beliau S1 Nurse Fakultas Ilmu Kesehatan Universitas Indonesia. Kemudian master beliau Master of Science International Health Program Kobe University Graduate School of Health Science Jepang. Kemudian doktoral beliau Doctor of Disaster Nursing Global Leader Program Graduate School of Nursing Art and Science University of Hyogo Jepang juga. Wah, kita hari ini kehadiran sebenarnya bukan dari Indonesia nih, dari Australia, kemudian Thailand dan Jepang pembicara kita, sangat amazing ya, great speakers. Kemudian pengalaman kerja beliau adalah dosen keperawatan jiwa Akbar Islamic Village Tangerang, kemudian internship di RSK Dharma Graha Tangerang, kemudian dosen keperawatan jiwa UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta Indonesia, dan saat ini UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta Indonesia, dan Sekprodi Nurse, dan 2012-2016 Sekprodi Ilmu Keperawatan UIN Syarif Hidayatullah Jakarta. Riset dan publikasi beliau sesuai dengan expertnya beliau, yaitu di jiwa dan erat kaitannya dengan disaster, yaitu tentang post-traumatic stress symptoms, kemudian after tsunami juga pernah menjadi bahan penelitian beliau, kemudian nursing certified care workers candidate based on economic partnership agreement between Indonesia and Japan. Kemudian ada lagi disaster mental health care, kemudian ada disaster responders, kemudian PhD role in disaster mental health care. Jadi dari yang dibacakan tadi sudah terlihat bahwa beliau memang expertnya di bencana dan kekuatan secara psikologi dan jiwa untuk menghadapi bencana itu. Dan keterlibatan dalam kesehatan jiwa bencana itu banjir Jakarta juga, kemudian gempa Lombok, gempa dan tsunami Selat Sunda. Sebenarnya pelatihan beliau sangat banyak yang sudah diikuti, dan pengalaman organisasi juga sekretaris bidang organisasi Ikatan Perawat Kesehatan Jiwa atau IPKJI. Kemudian Sekjen Pusat Pengembangan dan Pelayanan Keperawatan Jiwa Bencana itu 2012 sampai 2014, kemudian 2014 sampai 2016 Ketua Umum Pusat Pengembangan dan Pelayanan Keperawatan Jiwa Bencana. Jadi tidak dilakukan lagi semua yang telah dilakukan, kemudian pencapaian-pencapaian yang sudah didapat oleh Ibu Eni Nuraini PhD. Kepada beliau kita persilakan. Silakan Bu.
Ya, terima kasih banyak Bu Yalmi. Hello. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Eni. Thank you for keep staying with me until the last sessions. Today I'm going to talk about the effort to provide a sense of security and psychological assistance during natural disaster. So the key topic of my presentation today are going to talk about what is this? A disaster and sense of security, psychosocial assistance or support, biopsychosocial response and phase of disaster, and the last one, the psychosocial intervention or the variety of psychosocial support. So from the previous speaker, disaster, regardless natural or man-made disaster, is a terrible event that almost nobody has expected, because nobody has expected, nobody prepared for it. Therefore, the aftermath of disaster can lead to psychological consequences. Because disaster always destroying the sense of security and loss the feeling of safe. Speaking about the sense of security, it means a lot. Having a sense of security, it means having a sense of control in our lives. I mean, such as, what is the control in your life? The control is in your life is you having a sense how you are going to do. You having a sense, the ability to overcome your problem. But once a disaster occurred and it destroys your sense of security, parallelly, it's going to destroy your sense of control. And then having a sense of security as well can make us able to build meaningful connection with others. And then having a sense of security, it makes us have a feeling free from harm and having necessary support. So in order to achieve the sense of security, it is important to provide the psychosocial assistance or support, especially among the survivor. So psycho and social is what's a blended word, blended concept. That psycho, it's been us, our individual mind and soul, and social, it's been the external relationship or the environment. So why we combine the psycho into social? Because our life is about relationship. So having a relationship is not having relationship with the people and places. As a social human being, we are having relationship with the experience around of us and relationship with our environment that can make feel safe. So why psychosocial is really important? Because in disaster, because when we call about disaster result loss of the loved one, loss of the property, and it can lead stressful situation. For some people, it's quite a bit hard to recover and still need more of support. Therefore, psychosocial support can help us to prevent of the psychological disorder or mental health disorder. So psychosocial support plays an important role to support us to stay connected, because being a humans, we cannot live alone. We need other people. We need relationship, because being connected can help us feel more resilient, feel us more well, both emotionally and psychologically. So even though the biopsychosocial response during the disasters is variety in each survivor, however, the clinical researcher have been formulate or define this biopsychosocial response in the face of disasters. For example, we start from the rescue phase. Once the disaster occurred, in the few hours and a day after the disaster, all the stress, acute stress reaction syndrome will exist, such as anxiety, disbelief, disorientation, denial. So, and then gradually the positive emotional response will be improved, such as in the heroic phase. In the heroic phase, it's characterized there's altruism response between the responder and also the survivor. They work hand to hand to help each other to overcome the disaster. At this moment, the acute stress reactions exist, but some of part they feel optimistic and gratitude, as well as the honeymoon phase started. as we know, the honeymoon phase, it means something sweet. It's really sweet because at that moment, all the support from the local government, from the outside organization has arrived. And then survivor feels so many support they receive. Therefore, they feel optimism. They feel gratitude with all the support. But in the disillusionment phase, following like couple months after disasters, the emotional response dropped because of all the survivors already fatigued. They are exhausted because they have to live at a shelter or temporary house. And then due to the complex bureaucracy and then slow the reconstructions fast, the survivor get easily to be anger. They become grave and then blame and anger. Again, they getting drop their mental health condition. But then once the recovery and reconstruction path started, gradually the survivor emotional response getting better. They can readjust their life, their physical condition with their new living surrounding. So in the initial period, especially in heroic phase and honeymoon phase, usually the mental health professional has not arrived yet. So the first emergency responders who's going to meet the survivor. So in the initial period of this aftermath of disaster, the symptoms tend to be unstable because it can be dramatically changed. And then all the symptoms was regarded as a stress reactions. In the initial period until the honeymoon phase, it's quite difficult for us, the mental health professional, to determine the psychotic diagnosis because the emotional reactions is rapidly changed at the first month of disaster. However, this is the common stress reactions after disasters. So there's an emotional reaction, cognitive, physical, and interpersonal. It's a common reaction. And please bear in your mind, those reaction is normal reaction in abnormal situation. It's okay as a survivor to feel shock, to feel anger, to express their sadness, to be cry. It's okay. It's a normal reaction in abnormal situation. So we, as a mental health professional, is going to be worried if you, as a survivor, show joyful expression, excited, happiness expressions in disaster, during the disaster. It's not normal reaction, but having those common stress reaction is a normal reaction in abnormal situation. So after following months, naturally, survivor can be recovered by rely on their individual resilience and community resilience as well. However, some of persons may develop the major mental disorder following traumatic events such as PTSD, major depression, complicated grief, panic disorder, anxiety disorder, and many psychosomatic complaints. So who is at risk who can develop the major mental disorder? There are people who direct life threat as a result of the trauma, survivor who lost their family or their significant persons, survivor who already has prior mental health issue or mental health illness, and people who survivor who doesn't get any social support or lack of social support or having extensive physical injury and then prior traumatic exposure. However, talking about the mental disorder, I want everyone who already participate in this webinar try to change their concept that after disaster, please not use psychological trauma anymore. Tidak menggunakan trauma psikologis lagi. Because due to the WHO estimation project, only 3 up to 4% who will show severe disorder 12 months after the emergency. And then only 50 to 20% will have mild and moderate mental disorder. And the large percentage of survivors can only have normal distress and no need specific support. They can't naturally recover by rely on psychosocial support that they receive in the initial period of disasters, and also they have their own strengths, inner strengths, this individual resilience and community resilience as well. So why psychosocial support is really important in time of disaster? Because in psychosocial support is any type support from local or outside that try to protect us to have a psychosocial well-being or to prevent mental disorders after a crisis event or traumatic event. So this is the psychosocial intervention pyramid. This pyramid basically adapted from Maslow basic need hierarchy, as you already learned when you were in bachelor degree. We learned about Maslow hierarchy. So this psychosocial interventions adapt from that theory. So we can see in the baselines this what kind of intervention should be aimed. This kind of providing basic human needs such as food, shelter, water, and healthcare is important for general affected populations, because by providing the basic humanitarian service such as food, healthcare, water, and shelter, it can help the survivor to gain their psychological well-being. And the next layer, some of large population who show normal distress. So what should we do? We have what we have to do. What kind of psychosocial support that we have to provide? It can be some like secured assisting need or providing reunification of the family. So maybe some survivors their family they lost their family, and then we can help them to reunite with their family member. It's one of the psychosocial support. And also psychoeducation as well. Providing a psychoeducation also can alleviate the mental distress. And then the small group that we are afraid they are going to be a mental disorder and we want to prevent it. So we can provide non-specialized psychosocial support. So everyone, all of you, the health professional, the emergency respondent can be able to provide the psychosocial support, such as stress management, psychological first aid, or relaxation therapy. And then this is a very small amount survivor who got a severe mental disorder they need specialized psychological care, such as psychotherapy and medication, and require mental health professional assistance. But it's really small amounts, not so many. So the principle of psychosocial support for all of you who are going to involve in disaster situations, as a disaster responder, as an emergency responder, as a volunteer, if you want to provide psychosocial support, please bear in your mind that you're not allowed to perform psychotherapy. And then we also, as a mental health professional, is not allowed to perform formal mental health evaluation or diagnosis in disaster situations. And also, I strongly not recommend it, the individual psychological debriefing. What is psychological debriefing? It's kind of deep assessment to the survivor, you asking the detail of experience, you asking the detail of their feeling when they facing the traumatic event. It's not allowed to do the psychological debriefing, especially single psychological debriefing. And then as a disaster respondent, you are going to provide assistance or healthcare in the short time. So it's not allowed to provide long-term trauma therapies. Please refer the survivor with the traumatic symptoms to the specialized mental health facilities. So who is going to need the psychosocial support? Survivors, respondent, and volunteer as well, because you are also being a responder or volunteer is prone to get mental distress during providing disaster care. Family and community as well in the whole disaster cycle. So this is the several psychological support in disasters. As I already told you that assistance in providing daily life needs is one of the psychosocial support in disaster, and this is a very big amount. And in contributing to the reunification of separated family, providing education, psychological first aid, emotion stabilization, and trauma-focused psychological treatment that are going to be delivered by mental health professionals. So what is psychoeducation? Psychoeducation is some of direct instruction or information that help the survivor to understand about the disaster, preparing for disaster, and then responding to the crisis event. What kind of information that you can deliver as the emergency respondent? You can provide information about disaster. What kind of disaster? What emotional reaction will be exist in time of disaster, and how to overcome it. And then another psychosocial support is psychological first aid. It's one of psychosocial support that being human and supportive to the survivor. And then I'm sorry, I interview so many public health nurses, and they expect that they have some sort of skill in psychological. It tends to be counseling, but I'm sorry if you expect that, I have to disappoint you, because PFA psychological first aid does not something professional counseling, and PFA psychological first aid can be conducted not only by a mental health professional but also by a volunteer, by health responder, emergency respondent can have a chance to provide the PFA. And then also, PFA is not psychological debriefing, as I already told you, strongly against providing the psychological debriefing. And then in PFA, we're not asking someone to tell the experience of traumatic event in detail. We are not allowed to do that. So the principal action of PFA is just 3R: look, listen, and link. Look, what can we do? What can we help to support survivor? And then listens to the people, help them to feel calm. Link, connecting them with the information, connecting them with the people, their loved one, connecting them to meet their basic human needs. And then the other part that maybe you can have a chance to learn about it is emotion stabilizations or reserve development installation, or RDI. It's one of psychological technique which help to promote relaxations, control overwhelming emotion, and feel calm. It's intended for survivor with unstable emotion due to traumatic event. Maybe you feel so overwhelming, you have strong anxiety. You can use this emotion stabilization. What kind of emotion stabilization? First, maybe the breathing exercise. Butterfly hug. We learned about butterfly. I don't know. Maybe most of the participants is Z generation who love to watch drama, Korean drama. One of the movie, it's okay to not be okay, one of the saints showing the butterfly hugs. That's true. That's one of psychosocial support. You can learn about it and then provide it to all the survivors, and then grounding technique and so on. And this is trauma-focused psychotherapy that's going to be delivered by the mental health line treatment for PTSD beside medications. So it's try to restore the sense of security, emotional stabilizations, and try to help the PTSD survivor to not only enhancing their daily function, but also they can reduce their symptoms. Many type of trauma-focused psychotherapy, EMDR, cognitive behavioral therapy, TFT, and then many things. I think that's all of my presentations. Okay, thank you very much, and feel free to ask me.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nuraini. So it is really brief material thing, but please allow me, so it is not be fair if I'm not given an alike sentence on your slide. So please allow me to highlight some sentence on this a little, I think, because it is a very brief information. Jadi untuk partisipan semua ada yang beberapa kalimat penting yang akan kita highlight di sini, bahwa disaster ini erat kaitannya dengan psikologis, kemudian juga bagaimana kita men-treat atau menata laksanakan gangguan psikologis yang muncul akibat disaster ini. Jadi tadi ada highlightnya yang paling penting ada prinsip PPA ya, itu ada look, listen, and link. Jadi ini jadi kata kunci untuk kita supaya kita bisa membantu dalam kondisi bencana. Kemudian prinsip dukungan, siapa saja yang butuh dukungan, tadi semua sudah dijelaskan dengan very brief. Okay, all participants, so we arrived in the end of the giving material, but we still need for the inviting question from the participants. So I would like to read a question. The first question, I think, from Laurencia. She is an PhD student also. She wanna give a question to the Professor Paul. The question is how to manage panic mess while disaster comes. In other hand, we have a limited ability and limited facilitation on that time. So actually, Professor Paul already answered it here, but can you answer it live, please?
Sure. I think that there is a evolving science around risk communication and health risk communication that's important. We haven't always been very good at explaining to communities why we are doing what we are doing. But if we can successfully do that, then we reduce the amount of panic and concern in the community. Most recently, a lot of that work is focused on counter messages for conspiracy theories or misinformation. So, for example, during COVID, WHO and others have had to focus on trying to explain correct information in response to incorrect misinformation that has been distributed into communities. The social media world is a particular driver of that and a particular problem. And so we have to get better at engaging on social media with communities and sending effective health messages. Lots of science in that space. It's a whole other lecture. But we can talk about that perhaps next time.
Okay, thank you for the answer, Professor Paul. So it means that we need to prepare actually. The key point is we need to prepare before the disaster comes, even though disaster comes in unexpected time, right? So one of the way that to prepare community and social is by doing this seminar. So we give the information to the community. So we prepare for the healthcare professional So it means that we are improve our ability and our caring also. Okay, thank you, Professor Paul. So would like to move to the second question. The question would like address to Mr. Yudi. So the question is the question from Nurul from Probolinggo. So the question is, we never know when the disaster is going to strike. How to form a mindset to save ourselves toward affordable medical services from the disaster area. Is it clear, Mr. Yudi?
Can you repeat one more?
Okay. We never know when the disaster is going to strike. To save ourselves towards affordable medical services from the disaster area.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. Actually, if we talk about when it is time or the appropriate time to start, I think as soon as possible. From now on, it also can be due. I mean to say that as soon as possible we can do the preparation. It is better. We can start from ourselves, start from our family. We can identify where the closest healthcare facility from our home, and then we make notes like that, and then share to the all family members. It is kind of like the self-preparedness plan to countermeasure the disaster, to face the disaster situation. And then after that, most important thing to do, like we also can identify if our family member has a special condition, such as someone that have a chronic illness or pre-existing, I said that during my presentation, pre-existing health problem before the disaster. They also need more attention, like we have to prepare for their medication, because as I said in my presentation, during the disaster, usually we are difficult to get medications, to get our pills, for example. That's why at least we have to prepare until 3 days, at least 3 days medication for the family member that have that needs. I guess that is about my suggestion regarding that question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Yudi. Actually, we still have a question here, but because of it is over time, so I would like to say thank you to all the speakers, because it is a very amazing conference, a very amazing seminar, because we achieved more than 1,000 participants. Wow, very big applause for all of the speakers here. So it's really amazing seminar here. So it is a really, it is a successful of the committee to encourage the participants to attend here. So finally, we come in the end of giving material session. I say thank you to our broad speakers, committee, and participants, and give and apologize for me if as long as this session, there is something make you not satisfied. Hope this session will give us more insight, and see you on the next series. Thank you, Kokunaka. And then I will give the time to the MC. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Nurse Xiaomi, for being a moderator for our session at this seminar. The materials will already be presented by 4 great speakers that adds to our insight. Thank you for the great speakers. I will conclude a little bit for what I've already heard about the materials. We know that disaster can happen at any time. Dampak disaster begitu banyak, sehingga kita harus mengatur kejadian tersebut dan perlu koordinasi dan kontrol. In English, we say there are so many impacts of disaster. So we have to manage and have a coordination to control the disaster. Make a plan, be prepared, be ready. Disaster can also be natural and can also be caused by humans. And it can also impact to vulnerable groups such as pregnancies, women, and elderly. Not only has an impact of physical, but also can have an impact on physiology. In bahasa, we said, bencana juga bisa dialami oleh alam dan bencana juga bisa disebabkan oleh manusia, yang juga bisa berdampak pada kelompok rentan seperti ibu hamil dan kelompok lansia. Bukan hanya berdampak pada fisik, juga dapat berdampak pada psikologis. Thank you. Now, we are going to give an appreciation for the participants that join our seminar during their shift of work. Saat ini, kami akan memberikan apresiasi pada partisipan yang mengikuti seminar ini pada saat bekerja atau pada saat shift sedang berlangsung. Saya akan melakukan share screen, foto. Baik, untuk kedua partisipan yang sudah kami pilih, kami memberikan apresiasi yang sangat tinggi untuk Pak Edi Saputra dan Ibu Ninyoman Adi yang join pada saat sedang bekerja. Mungkin dari sekian banyak orang yang kami ketahui, yaitu di sini ada 1.000 pada Zoom, juga mengikuti acara ini pada saat bekerja. Terima kasih apresiasi yang sebesar-besarnya untuk partisipan yang telah mengikuti seminar ini pada saat shift bekerja. We are thankful for the participants who join our seminar during their shift of work. Now, we're going to have a documentation for our seminar. I ask for the committee to capture our seminar as a documentation for today's seminar.
Oke, kita hitung mundur ya. 3, 2, 1. Oke, again. Next slide.
Next slide lagi.
Oke, next slide.
Slide-nya cukup banyak. Next slide.
Oke, next slide. We have a few slides here. Next slide. Okay, next slide. Okay, done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. for helping me take a documentation for today's seminar. Untuk mengingatkan para partisipan bagi yang belum mendaftarkan diri, silahkan WhatsApp ke 0816 4245 941 dan ikuti instruksi dari balasan pesan otomatis. Namun, jika partisipan sudah pernah mengisi form pendaftaran, maka tidak perlu mengisi form berulang. Terima kasih. Untuk seminar hari ini sudah selesai dan segera akan diakhiri. Untuk para partisipan, terima kasih telah mengikuti acara seminar hari ini. Terima kasih juga untuk para panitia yang sudah mengorganisasikan acara hari ini dengan sangat baik. I give thankful for 4 great speakers for 3 countries. For Professor Paul Arbon, for Mrs. Pratuma Rithpho, for Miss Annie Agustini, and also for Mr. Yudi, Chandra. Thank you. See you on the next occasions. Goodbye.
Ya, Mbak.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See you next seminar.
See you in the next seminar.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. You miss you, love you.
Tunggu sertifikat.
Salam dari dia.
Love you.
Jaga kesehatan.
Thank you and Sawadika.
สวัสดีค่ะ สวัสดีค่ะ See you ขอบคุณค่ะ You want to travel to Indonesia?
Thank you.
If you didn't good,
Sorry about my background in Augsburg. I could not trace background.
Thank you.